Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, stay with us as the Suns get set to shine.
Perry, to Gar Hurd. Here's the jump shot.
Jumps to Marley, a long three. He got it! He got it! Into Booker. Here's the three. Suzanne! Oliver, Sir Charles, and he flies in for a wham, bam, slam. Whammo time! He got it! Suzanne! Oh, brother!
Welcome to 7 Seconds or Less, a podcast about the NBA with a Phoenix Suns focus. My name is Max McCauley, aka Podcast Boy, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host. You know him, you love him. His name is David Nash. David, how you doing?
Well, plenty know me. I don't know if anyone loves me, Max, but...
Everyone loves you, man. I'm the only one who ever gets criticized for this podcast, ever. Everyone likes you.
Yeah, but you've also got the cool nickname, which I'm very jealous of, so it's a trade-off. But I'm doing well, Max. We get a holiday season here sort of thing, as I was explaining to you before we hit record, and I'm enjoying the long weekend with a friend's wedding in between. How about you? How are you going?
Yeah, we talked about that. I want to let any listeners know who are American. In case you don't already, go look up like what other countries get in terms of holidays and leave. It's we don't get as much, I'll just say that. But I'm doing well. It's been another 2-week layoff for us. We're going to try to get a bit more consistent going forward.
Yep.
David, we're trying. We have real lives, unfortunately, but we're going to try. But today I'm really excited about this episode, David. We're going to do two sort of fun things that are looking forward in the offseason, but also looking at the playoffs. So we're going to start with a high-level look at this offseason for the Suns, kind of based on how the lottery will shake out. So we'll run down 3 scenarios. We'll run down if we win the lottery. We'll run down if we finish in the 2 to 4 range. And then we'll run down how the 5 to 7 range would look for us.
Yep, I think a good tie into the fact that we've been doing less pods, Max, is that I think we're coming with some good ideas and content, and we're certainly enjoying ourselves when we do get a chance to do them. But as you said, I actually had a look back. We didn't actually start this pod until a month's time from now, Max, where we did a mock lottery. So we're essentially going to be ahead with some plans for a few draft episodes coming up before, our 1-year anniversary. So we're going to have plenty of time to talk off-season with just playoff basketball and no Suns basketball to talk about at the moment.
It's almost our birthday.
Exactly.
Yeah, you previewed it. So our second segment's going to be sort of playoff focused, so in the general NBA vein, but also we're going to try to find some Suns tie-ins for the things, just kind of like what we're observing and how it fits into the Phoenix Suns in their offseason.
Yeah, you and I have spoken about it. I'm sure the listeners who are watching, other playoff games as well are feeling it too. You can't help but think about Phoenix Suns related things when you're watching the playoffs, whether it's how games are, panning out, or certain players that might be available this offseason, and that's the kind of stuff that I guess we're going to tie into those more general conversations, Max.
Yep, we are cursed to look at everything through Suns-colored glasses. All right, David, before we get into anything, though, maybe a little recap?
Yeah, well, obviously no Suns games anymore. This is really the first kind of transition episode after the final end to the season for the Suns, and because of that, there hasn't been a lot of news either, unless you follow the clickbaity stuff online at the moment, which I'm not going to do. So I thought we'd just run through the key dates coming up for the off-season. Obviously, with it being playoff time, Max, it's not a good time for Suns basketball, and we've kind of learnt that for the last 8 or 9 years. But this is our season coming up, Max, that we've learned. The Suns season is all about the draft and free agency and hope for the future. So May 14 is the first key date, around our first birthday, Max, and that'll be the draft lottery where we find out our fate of where that pick is going to land. And then the combine happens pretty much directly after that, from May 14 to 19. The NBA Finals, I believe, are slated for the very end of May. May 30, I think, can be the latest date that starts. June 10's a key date, Max. That's where all these guys that are currently declaring for the draft, that's their deadline to pull out if they don't like what they're hearing from the combine and things like that. So, that's probably not going to affect the likes of Zion Williamson or Ja Morant at the top of the draft, but, maybe some guys that we'll be looking at for our second round pick, or, possible trade back scenarios we might need to factor in there. The last possible day that the NBA Finals can be on is June 16, Max. and then the draft follows that straight away on June 20. So pretty keen date for me there. I always take the day of the draft off here in Australia, so I'm sure we'll be having another reaction pod to whatever's happened then. July 1, obviously everyone knows, is when free agency begins, and the moratorium ends on July 6 when guys can actually start officially signing, Max. So plenty of dates for the next couple of months and plenty of pods for us to work in around those.
Yep, I can't wait. This is one of my favorite parts of the year. I think it is for all nerds.
It's our season, Max.
It really is. The first that you mentioned is the one we're going to focus on today, the May 14th lottery.
Yep.
We're, like I said earlier, we're gonna do 3 different scenarios. We win it, we do well in it, we do poorly in it, I guess is the best way to describe it. But before we get into any of it, though, David, I don't know. I think I have sort of a weird feeling of this lottery compared to everyone else. Everyone seems as nervous for this one as ever. I'm actually not that nervous for this one because we have such a low chance of getting Zion, and I care so little about the rest of it that it's almost like I'm almost going in a little more carefree than usual.
Yeah, I'm probably similar to your feelings. I think things are overly negative. I quite often laugh about how pessimistic Suns fans are in regards to the lottery, considering we literally won it last year. And you kind of see things like, oh, the Suns will never win the lottery. And I guess lightning striking twice is going to be even harder. But we have just as good a shot as anyone. But as you said, the odds are flattened out now, and it's going to be... As a person who's always loved the lottery, even when the Suns, I guess, weren't in it, Max, I think I'm excited for this one just because there can be absolute chaos on the night where, there's a team jumping from God knows where and, maybe even 3 or 4 teams at the top there that didn't have the better odds. So from that perspective, it's going to be exciting. But yeah, I agree. It's kind of Zion, I should say, or bust, and that kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, as much as I would love to land the number 1 pick.
Yeah, so I guess we're on the same page on this one. So let's start with there. Let's start with what happens if the Suns land Zion. We actually get the first pick. And before we get even into this at all, let's just get this out of the way. They're going to take Zion if they land first. Every team would take Zion.
Yep.
When you have a guy like Zion in a draft, you don't look at your team needs or your team fit. You take the once-in-a-decade freak of nature. Everyone does that. Every team. The discussion's done.
It really is. I laughed at the Ringers draft guide where they kind of, said every team should draft Zion. And I've mentioned it a few times. I really hope whoever wins the lottery, and if it is the Suns, I just hope they declare it on the night because, there's 2 months, I guess, if we look back at those dates I just rattled off between the lottery and the draft. 1 month, I should say. Sorry, Max. But, even that's going to be long enough for people trying to write articles about doing anything other than drafting Zion Williamson at the top.
They're not going to say anything. The team that gets the number 1 pick loves to have their little circus for the next month where they bring the guys in to make a big show out of it.
Yeah.
So, unfortunately, they're not going to do that. They're also, maybe trades or whatever. I mean, obviously, I would not trade the Zion pick, but maybe somebody would. So, you got to keep all the possibilities open. But anyway, let's move on to actually, what happens if we get the number 1 pick. First, I want to ask you, you actually had this question to me, and we'll start with you on it, though. What do you see as the biggest weakness in Zion's game right now?
I think I've mentioned this before, so it's probably not a huge surprise to anyone who listens to us regularly, but I think the obvious call is always going to be shot mechanics, and that's always going to go to the deep 3 ball, and everyone's going to look at him as being a, 4, maybe sometimes 3 in the NBA, and therefore he's going to need to be able to shoot. But for me, it's actually starts earlier than that with the free throw line stuff, Max. I think he's 64% at the free throw line. LeBron, as his comparison, I guess, was 75% in his rookie year and 73.6% overall for LeBron's career. That's kind of your baseline if you're Zion, in my opinion, because this dude is going to absolutely live at the line. We saw it in college. It's going to happen in the pros as well. He's going to get hacked going to the basket because he's such a good finisher as well. So he's going to have to improve that for me. That's kind of the base, and I guess if we're talking overall shooting mechanics, that ties into the longer ball stuff as well. But that's definitely the biggest concern for me going into his rookie year. What about you?
That's a really good one because people think about, he can't shoot the 3 as being the problem. I don't think he ever needs to shoot a 3, but you're right. It'll really limit his effectiveness if he doesn't shoot free throws better because, as you said, he's going to be there a lot.
Yeah.
Mine, actually, I went a little differently because, everyone knows about the shooting, although you had the right take on it that it's more about free throws. For me, it's kind of his handle, and I don't even think his handle's bad at all. It's actually pretty good, especially for a player of his type. But in the half court and the playoffs, I keep watching these games. When it grinds down a little bit, I'm not concerned about Zion in transition in the regular season. He's just going to be ridiculous. But in this, the slow down pace, half court style, in a tight regular season game or any playoff game, how well is he going to be able to maneuver in tight spaces with the ball in his hands?
Yep.
I think he'll be able to do it to an extent. To a certain extent, he just overwhelms people with his size and quickness. But still, I think he needs to tighten it up a little bit. He needs to be better with the ball in his hands to really be effective in that scenario. So that's one thing I'll be watching. It won't affect him early in his career, but it will affect him later.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and there's kind of two tie-ins there. There's, how do you build a team around a guy like Zion, and do you kind of half-ass it, or do you kind of go, this is our guy, and we need to make sure all the other pieces on the court fit his game, and he's got the space to work in? So that's kind of one question. And then, a tie into what we're going to be talking about later with the playoffs is playoff basketball is so different to regular season stuff, and you can build a team to be decent for the regular season and get yourselves to the playoffs, and then everything's magnified. We're seeing that in these series is any little weakness is exploited from certain teams. So again, do you want Zion next to Ayton if Ayton doesn't extend his range out and can't create the space? Do you have the proper guards with Zion, or is he, being asked to handle too much where, that weakness is maybe exploited a little bit? So yeah, I think that's another great point from you. I think a guy, one college season, could do whatever he wanted in high school, and from the improvements that we've seen him make to his game, even from high school to college, I've got no doubt that he'll be okay there, but definitely worth noting. He's not a perfect prospect by any stretch of the imagination. He just happens to be at his peak way better than anyone in this draft class, and way better than a lot of guys that we've seen in probably the last 4 or 5 years. Yeah,
there's no such thing as a perfect prospect. The thing with Zion is that the package of his athleticism, which is unmatched by anybody ever except for maybe LeBron, plus his IQ, plus his motor, it's like he's a can't-fail prospect, but can't-fail versus perfect, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's get into this, David. We talked about Zion. Let's talk about how we would build around him a little bit. First, you're the cap guy, so let's get into some of the cap stuff, because there's been this big question over whether we could keep Oubre or not. And the answer is always, of course, we could, but is it still realistic? So for the listeners, explain kind of how Zion would affect our cap situation going into the summer.
Yeah, I mean, wherever we fall in the lottery, it's going to be a couple of mil between, I guess, the first pick and the 7th pick for what's going to come off our cap sheet. So the rules have changed a little bit on this in the most recent CBA, I think it is. I think before you could kind of hold off signing your rookies and therefore have no money against your cap sheet going into July, if that kind of my memory serves me correctly there, Max. But now the whole 120% of the rookie scale goes against your cap from the moment that you draft anyone in the first round. So no matter where we pick, whether it's Zion at 1 or, someone at 7, we're going to have anywhere between 10 million and 7 million come off the books. Or maybe a little bit lower if we get to 6 or 7, but I'm trying to be hopeful here, Max. But that kind of means in our scenario where cap space isn't, I guess, as big as what we would have expected with a roster like this, you can kind of get down to really only having 10 mil in cap space before moves, I should say, though, because there's been a few things written and said recently about how the Suns have no cap space, and whilst it's true from a black and white standpoint, we'll probably get into it. There are things that you can do to free up money. It doesn't mean that they're just not going to bother trying to sign any free agents this offseason.
Yeah, no, if Kevin Durant wants to come to the Suns for some reason, he will be on the Suns. They can make that happen. There's things you can do.
Exactly.
But so I think the real interesting question is with Kelly Oubre, not so much because of part of it's because he did the number 1 pick, or like you said, it's $10 million, but also because he brings a lot of the same things as Zion. Obviously, Zion's not the same guy.
Yeah.
But Oubre, he's your sort of like, wing who's like, but he's bigger than a wing sort of a lot of times. Oubre's more of a wing than Zion is. Zion's more of a big. But still, he brings the energy stuff. He's sort of a defensive focused guy a lot of times. He's the guy who, keeps everyone else in lines. They have similar elements where they bring to your team, which is why it's tougher that if you're going to get Zion and you're paying him $10 million this year and then going forward even more, giving Oubre, say it takes $17 million to keep him, it gets tougher to justify.
It does. And I've spoken to a few people on this. I think, realistically, as you said, it does hurt the chances if they get Zion at number 1. Obviously, you're not going to root against a scenario of landing the number 1 pick just to keep Kelly, or possibly keep Kelly Oubre. But, I think if that does happen, it from what I've spoken to with a few people, it just depends on money more so, I think, Max. I think that's, as you were just alluding to, it becomes a lot more about money and other possible free agency acquisitions as well. If the Suns kind of get a sense that they might be able to land a couple of other guys that they prioritize, then maybe Kelly goes even a rung or two further down the food chain. But I don't think we can just put a line through his name because, personally for me, I think, I'd lean heavily on both just from a culture and effort and, high character standpoint. I think that's how you turn this thing around, with getting rid of some of the dead wood that's been on this bad roster for the last 3 or 4 years and having some fresh faces around the pieces that you want to keep. So obviously, I think the question I'd throw to you, Max, is say the Suns get Zion and can offload TJ Warren for free, or relatively for free. We're talking about kind of a salary dump with maybe attaching a low pick or something. How much more than the 10 mil that TJ gets would you be prepared to pay Kelly?
Interesting question. In the scenario where we have Zion?
Yes.
And before I answer, I'm going to answer, but real quick, I just want to make the point. I don't want people to think that I'm down on keeping Oubre even if we get Zion.
Yeah.
I just think it's like a 99% chance we keep him if we have the second pick or lower, and like maybe more like a 65-70% chance if we get Zion. But anyway, moving on from that, I think the most I'd have a hard time paying him more than 15.
Yeah.
I think there's a chance he ends up being worth more than 15. But I don't want to pay him at his best possible outcome. You know what I mean? You want to leave in the possibility that he'll outperform his contract.
Yeah.
So I'm getting nervous from getting to like 17. I mean, listen, if I'm the one making this decision, it's going to be really hard for me to say no to signing Kelly Oubre back. I just love the guy. I think he's great for this team. I think he really is the kind of guy who can change the culture around. But hell, man, it's just going to be really hard to pay him 17 or 18. What do you think? Yeah,
I pretty much agree with those sentiments. I think if you can get off at least TJ and maybe him and Josh Jackson for something, I think, for the next couple of years, it's a no-brainer. When we're talking about Fitz and Zion and Kelly, and you really shouldn't be thinking about next season. Like, you're going to make that work. The Suns don't have enough NBA talent for that to be a problem. What we're really talking about is, as you say, if you're paying $17 million for Oubre in kind of year 3 or 4 of this deal, and you're trying to build the pieces around Zion and Booker and maybe Ayton as well, as we were talking about before, putting the right pieces on the court, then you maybe get stuck a little bit. So it's really important. I think it would be even more important that it's a declining deal, which we've mentioned on this pod before for Kelly Oubre, and then just don't overpay, and then you can always get off Kelly at some point, when it makes sense for the team. As I said, like year 3 or 4, as long as you don't overpay. So there's been a few examples of that in recent history with restricted free agents. I think, Brooklyn were throwing all those deals out. Tyler Johnson was one of them. Otto Porter was another one. Alan Crabb, I think, was another one. And then he eventually made his way to Brooklyn anyway. So, I think particularly if you're being forced to match something by another team, there's going to be a real question there of, don't just match because another team's had an offer for Kelly and you kind of makes you think that, we'll be able to get off on him to some other team in a few years if we need to, because, particularly in Tyler Johnson and Crabb's scenarios, they became contracts that needed to pay something to get rid of them or take another bad contract back. Whereas I guess Otto Porter still had some value, even though his contract was probably a little too large, Max.
You touched on something in there that I think is really interesting. I hadn't thought about this yet. If we do win Zion, really the desperation level generally for the franchise goes way down.
Yes.
We're not nearly as concerned about being close to the playoffs next year or anything like that. We have Zion Williams, and it almost gives you a few more years of leeway for the rebuild in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting point. So that is key. I hadn't thought about that. But let's move into last thing, I think, on the we win the lottery scenario.
Yep.
We really haven't talked yet about if we do win Zion. Let's put Oubre to the side. Let's not think about him for this question. What is your biggest goal in the offseason in terms of building the team around him? What are you trying to do?
Point guard, Max?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
All of a sudden, you've got 3 all-NBA type talents on the roster already in Ayton, Booker, and Zion, and they're all going to be reliant on having a glue guy, I suppose. Not a glue guy in the sense of why I call Mikal Bridges glue, but a point guard who can facilitate to all of these guys. Not a rookie, not a young guy, a guy that knows that his job is to go out there every night and get these 3 guys the ball in their spots. Because, as good as Booker's passing is, Ayton's shown some flashes of passing, and Zion's probably going to be an above-average passer for his position as well. They're not point guards, and they're not guys that know how to run the team and, kind of share the load amongst this really talented team all of a sudden. So that would be the thing. And then, something we're probably going to touch on later is obviously shooting as well, Max, because that becomes a premium around these guys as well.
Yeah, I mean, you basically just read out my notes. Of course, this wasn't the most, amazingly hard point to figure out in the world. And I would expand beyond just point guard. I mean, definitely point guard, but just guards in general, too. They just need better guards.
Yeah.
Better guards, better shooting, and better playmaking sort of across the roster just generally.
Yeah.
Higher IQ players, all that. Totally agree.
Quick early playoff, I guess, observation here before we jump into it later. I tweeted this earlier today with Callan Olsen's poll about whether you would take SGA over Bridges, basically, was essentially the kind of crux of the poll there. But, if you're watching these playoffs as a Suns fan and not kind of saying, I wish we had more than 1.5 guards on the roster, then, I don't know what you're getting out of these playoffs as a Suns fan, because it's just so obvious. It's, guards are just dominating the play at the moment. And, this is the pointy end of the season.
Yep, we're going to get into that in a couple different ways, because that's really the most glaring observation. And real quick before we move on to picks 2 through 4, I want to apologize to Kellen Olsen, who got mad at me for, I guess, he thought I screwed up his poll by retweeting it and saying that I like Bridges and Doncic, but...
You're skewing the results, Max.
He got mad. All right, let's go on to picks 2 through 4. So, David, it's interesting. I think that this is like so of course you'd rather have a 2 through 4 pick than a 5 through 7 pick.
Yep.
But you're also in more dangerous territory. I think if you're the 2 through 4, you can screw up your future worse.
Yep.
Because you put a lot of stock into another not sure thing rookie, and it doesn't work out. Like, you're just delaying the inevitable even further. It would not be good. But all right, enough of that. David, how are things shaping up for you 2 through 4? If the Suns land in that range, who are the guys you're looking at? Maybe start at 2, and then I'll talk about 4.
I'll test your knowledge on my nicknames here, Max.
Okay.
2 is Jesus.
Okay. I think. Oh, it's RJ because of the whole Godfather-ish thing or whatever, right?
Yeah, he's God's godson, Max.
Right.
3 is Firefest.
I guess that's Morant.
That is Ja Morant. And 4 is Silk, which I know you know that one.
Why is Morant Firefest?
Well, we'll probably get into it talking about Morant, but I'm a little worried, as a lot of people are, that he's all hype and not going to be able to produce when it comes to it.
That is tough. That's the meanest thing you've said about anybody on this podcast ever.
Well, the jar also lends itself to the nickname, obviously, with Ja Rule being the head of Firefest. So there's a couple of tie-ins there. But I'm not totally out on Morant by any stretch. I probably shouldn't be too harsh with the nickname there. But yeah, I am a little bit worried about him from a kind of hype standpoint from the tournament and things like that. But yeah, I've still got Barrett at 2 and Culver at 4, which we skipped over very quickly there. But how does it shake out for you?
So you previewed this earlier on. We're going to really dive into the draft over the next few episodes. So I suspect that these things may all be changing.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I think one thing that I'm not going to change, I'm with you on RJ. I think that RJ is pretty clearly the second best prospect in this class. I think people have gotten too down on him because he was in a... People think this is crazy when I say this. He's in a bad situation at Duke.
Yep.
They were extremely talented, but they were kind of similar to the Miami Heat of the first LeBron year, where a bunch of stars didn't know how to play with each other. It's like a good situation talent-wise, but not really in terms of how you make it work-wise.
Yep.
They had no shooting either. RJ, at the end of these games in the tournament, I'm sure you watched a lot of the Michigan State game, the one against Taco Fall. I can't even remember what team he's on. It was RJ having kind of just drive it in, and there's nothing else to do. He had no space because he had no shooting. RJ just really didn't have a lot to do. And he still had an incredible freshman season, stats-wise, especially counting stats-wise, but really any kind of stats-wise, he was really good.
Yeah.
And he was a young freshman. Him and Zion are about the same age. They're both babies. I think that people were too down on him because of some of the efficiency stuff and also some of the decision-making stuff, when a lot of times I don't think he had the right decision to be made.
Yeah, and that kind of ties in for me with a guy like Cam Reddish as well. I think, probably these top-end guys were ones that I was already diving into, before the college season started, whereas, as you said, I'm probably going to change my mind as we go along and talk to some people about the draft as well on some of these guys that are back from, 4 to maybe the end of the lottery. But I would encourage anyone to go and look at what RJ Barrett did for, say, the Canadian national team against the US team, with a team that was kind of built a little bit more for him, where he could be the lead focal point, because that Duke team was just a disaster from a fit standpoint with those top 3 guys and how they all kind of are prepared to play with each other. So we saw some negatives and some potential problems with a guy like RJ in a high volume situation and high usage. But yeah, I just I'm not sure whether it's the most, I guess, prudent draft strategy here, but it really takes me back to last year with Doncic and Ayton. I was really only prepared to use a number 1 pick on both of those guys because I really thought, after watching everyone, they were the only 2 deserving of being chosen at number 1. And this is kind of how I feel about the second pick here. Is I'm really scared of taking anyone at number 2 other than RJ Barrett, just from a kind of potential ceiling standpoint, Max.
Yeah, I think we're both on the trade the pick bandwagon if possible. But I'll finish up my top 4 here. I think I'm going to have Morant at 3. I don't know. Again, this is one of those ones that I'm going to go back and forth on.
Yep.
It's really just a pure talent play. Like, the dude's ridiculously talented.
Yeah.
For a lot of teams, I might even have him above RJ because I think the ceiling might be higher. I think he could be a really crazy good player someday. I just don't think he's going to be very good at all right away. And the Suns, I'm not sure they can struggle through a year with a 19-year-old point guard who weighs 180 pounds or whatever he weighs. I'm not sure they can do that.
Here's a question for you, Max. Let's say Booker keeps on the curve that he's on, and Ja ends up being every bit of the player that I guess people who think he should be the number 1 pick, ends up being. But what's kind of a current NBA equivalent backcourt of those two? We probably should touch on the fact that Morant is kind of a below level deep threat at the moment and probably just doesn't grade out to be a good defender in the NBA at all, based on what we've seen so far. He does have size. I think he's like 6'3", so there is a little bit of hope there for him versus someone like maybe Trae Young or Garland in this draft, maybe. But, who in the NBA, who's the good backcourt that Booker and Morant could compare to?
I think, and I haven't thought about this before, so this is just the first one I can come up with.
Question without notice, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, but I think I came up with one that makes some sense. John Wall and Bradley Beal, maybe? Maybe the closest thing I can think of.
Yeah, okay. John Wall.
Because you have the physically overpowering point guard sort of guy who can't really shoot that well, but he overpowers people and has really good passing acumen because John Morant's passing is underrated.
Yeah.
And then you have Booker. The Booker Beal comparison is pretty obvious.
Yeah, I guess John Wall did stop playing defense at some point, but probably as a draft prospect was a little bit better on that end than Ja Morant. I think he kind of has all defensive potential, but injuries and effort kind of caught up with Wall there. But yeah, that's probably a good one.
I would say Morant's more an effort thing, right? Morant probably could be a good defender. I mean, he's a physical freak, but he doesn't. But I always am careful with stuff like this because everyone thought Andrew Wiggins was going to be all defense just because he was athletic. I think that Morant might be somewhere in that range where, can he jump out of the gym? Of course he can. But does he have the lateral movement skills to be a good defender? Like, there are different kind of athletic traits that make you a good defender from someone who can dunk on people.
Yeah, and you touched on the other side of the coin there, is it does appear to be all effort, which is a really hard thing to gauge from watching college ball. Very good tie-in with Devin Booker there. He was on a bad Murray State team in a high-usage offensive role where that team wasn't going to do anything unless he did everything on offense that night. So trying to project out how he might be able to improve on defense is pretty hard. But at least on what I've seen so far, it doesn't project to be great on that end for him.
No, I totally agree. All right, I'm going to move to number 4 here, David. And this is where I might break your heart a little bit and break my own heart.
Uh-oh.
I'm souring a little bit on Jarrett Culver, David. Just a little bit.
Silk.
I'm souring a little bit. Here, and let me tell you why. I don't think he's Josh Jackson at all. I don't. I think he's a much better decision maker than Josh Jackson. I think he's a better ball handler. I think there's a lot of things he does better. But I am a little concerned about the guy who's the jack of all trades in college who isn't really elite at anything. Or doesn't also have really elite athleticism. Like, I'm a little concerned that if you're that kind of guy, you kind of end up not being able to do anything all that well in the NBA.
That's fair. I don't necessarily agree. I kind of like the Jackson comparison, even though they're opposites, as you kind of touched on at the same time. I think Culver, I nickname him Silk for a reason. Everything's just smooth out there. He looks, something that you and I talk about quite a lot. He looks like a basketballer that can play basketball the right way. I think the knocks on him, as you said at the end there, are probably more athleticism-wise and how good can he possibly be, even though he is a high IQ guy, to be picked this high in the draft. But for me, when I'm doing this, he's the line there where it just really dictates how bad this draft is, because he's 4 in my big board at the moment, and that doesn't mean that I don't necessarily agree with a lot of what you're saying in terms of the danger at picking someone like that this high in the draft. He's just such a smooth player that he kind of goes above a lot of the guys that we're going to talk about next, just because I see him as a high floor guy that's going to be able to come in and do what he did in college this season. I can kind of trust some of the things that I know he's going to come into the pros and be able to do, whereas a lot of these other guys, there's not much that I trust. Like, it's all potential and maybes. So that's why he's that high for me. But yeah, I agree. Athleticism-wise and being able to stick in the NBA with kind of better pros around him and up against him, there are some question marks there for sure.
I think he's going to be an NBA player. In fact, I'm pretty confident he's going to be an NBA player. The comparison that scares me, because when I heard this, I didn't invent this, I heard it and freaked out a little bit because I was like, oh God, that does seem about right to me. Man, it's a little Evan Turner-y. He's a little Evan Turner-y, that's what makes me nervous.
Yeah, I definitely can agree with that, which, that's an NBA player. That's a very overpriced NBA player currently who managed to get a team to pay, way more for him than they probably should. But yeah, again, at least at that pick, I'm probably not going to use the pick if the Suns are at 4 and I'm the GM, but that kind of creates the line for me where you just kind of like, do I really have to pick this guy at number 4 just because I know he's going to be able to come in and be an NBA player? That's pretty dangerous, and that kind of sums up the draft. But I guess I'll throw the question at you: who leaps him? Who are you thinking might leap him at number 4 at the moment?
It's just this giant empty space where nothing exists right now. But really, I guess Brandon Clark. I think that guy makes a lot of sense for the Suns. But right now, I don't want to be really held to anything right now. Culver might end up being 4 or even 3 for me. It's fluid.
Yeah.
Really, after the first 2, I'm just completely lost right now. But yeah, I think Brandon Clark's the name I'd throw out. That's the one that comes to the tip of my head. But real quick, though, you touched on trading the pick, and I want to ask you about trading the pick, because everyone talks about trading the pick.
Yep.
We should trade the pick. I believe Ali Cozy on Twitter has started saying we should draft Trey D pick if we end up 4th, which is very funny. And I generally agree, but the question I have is the trade has to be there, right? Like, who are you willing to trade this stuff for? So I'm going to run through 6 point guards for you, and I'm going to ask you what's the highest pick you'd be willing to trade for them in the 2 to 4 range, or say you wouldn't be willing to trade any of those.
Okay, I like it. Let's do it.
I know your answer already for this one, but how about Drew Holiday?
Trade the pick.
And that's number 2, the highest, right?
I would trade 2, and I don't know the next 5 guys that you're going to rattle off, but I would say that he's at the highest, and that's just a mix of the boxes that I like to tick next to Devin Booker, plus age, plus contract. Again, I'm not sure who you're going to mention, but it's quite often looked over. I think Drew has 2 full years left on his deal, which is, pretty enticing when you're trading a pick of this value. And
don't spend too much time comparing these guys to each other, because then you'll ruin 7 seconds or less.
Okay.
Bradley Beal.
For number 2, I get to pick what I'm trading it for.
Would you basically what's the highest one you trade?
In a push, I'd probably trade 2.
All right, Kyle Lowry.
Ooh, I'm very sour on Kyle Lowry from a value standpoint, although I would be lying if I didn't say that the other day watching them and Toronto's fan base turning on him, I kind of thought, playoff Kyle Lowry is obviously a whole nother thing, but the Suns kind of need to get to the playoffs first. So as a buy low candidate, if Toronto were kind of clearing house a little bit, I definitely wouldn't trade 2, but I'd look in that 3 to 7 range for sure.
All right. By the way, I agree with everything you're saying so far. Mike Conley.
Mike Conley's a tough one. I've almost put a line through him just because of some of James Jones's quotes, but we can't always trust GMs. I had that same point about David Griffin and Drew Holiday earlier this week.
And you get to be the GM now, David.
I'm the GM now, so if it's not really projecting what the Suns would do and it was me, I would probably trade the 3rd pick in the draft for Mike Conley, just because I think he's only got one fully guaranteed year on his deal.
Spencer Dinwiddie.
Ooh, Spencer. This is where you don't want to get into crazy territory where you're like, yeah, trade the 4th pick in the draft for Spencer Dinwiddie.
Right.
I think there's a second kind of line for me after that, 6th or 7th pick where you're starting to kind of go, yeah, I'd rather just a plug and play rotation guy on a good deal. So I'd probably look at the 7th or 8th pick in the draft, Max.
I'm guessing you'll be similar on this one, Goran Dragic.
Dragic.
Itch.
I'll edit that one out for you. I am going to cheat here, and I'm going to back channel my way to Goran and tell him to opt out of his player option, and we'll sign him in free agency instead.
So my point of the exercise is really to say, yeah, if you can get Drew Holiday or Bradley Beal, trade D pick. But if you're looking at Spencer Dinwiddie or Goran Dragic, maybe. It depends on what pick you got,
Yeah, and I still think, as kind of negative as we've been, and we'll probably have some more specific pods on these guys like RJ Barrett and Ja Morant, like they have warning signs there, but that's the 2nd and 3rd pick in the draft. Like, you want a really damn good player if you're giving up 4, 5, 6 cost controlled years on guys like this if they turn out. So whilst there is some danger there, you can kind of go too far the other way and make a bad trade out of desperation. But something you and I have spoken quite a bit on privately is, at some point with this core, with the pieces that you've got and that you're kind of content with, you kind of have to stop taking on young talent, Max.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. Real quick, because the whole point of this, we're supposed to be hypothetical offseason. We haven't done that at all with picks 2 through 4 yet. For me, I think I build around Morant and RJ, who I think we should focus on because they're the ones that we'd probably pick 2 or 3. I build around them very similarly. I think they're both going to be initiators along with Booker. They're kind of, I don't know if RJ's going to end up being a point guard or not, but I could see that kind of being the pseudo backcourt, I guess, RJ and Booker.
Yeah.
Same with Morant and Booker, obviously, would be the backcourt. For me, no matter what, I'm still looking for better guard play, so I'm looking to upgrade, the point guard position or whatever. I'd love to bring either one of those guys off the bench. Mm-hmm. If it's Tyler, it's Tyler, but you'd like it to be better than Tyler.
Yeah.
And then I think, like I said, I alluded to earlier, I bring back Oubre 100% in either scenario.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that. I would throw RJ in with Zion in terms of clearing out the other wings on the roster. If you end up drafting a guy like RJ, play him off the bench, give him all those wing minutes that he needs as a guy with the ball in his hand, I think, and kind of hope that he's a much better version of what we saw of Josh Jackson in that role for most parts of this season. As I said, I've kind of gone at length. I'm betting on the upside of a guy like RJ, and you'd be doing the same with Ja, but I wouldn't start either of them, as you said. Maybe bring in a Augustine type, a Fred VanVleet type to come in on a 2-3 year deal and start next to Booker if you draft a guy like Ja Morant. But yeah, I think that's kind of the way forward if you do land at 2 or 3 in the draft, is being prepared to take one of these guys, putting enough pieces in the team that they can kind of come off the bench. And my final point that I've got down here highlighted, Max, is make them take the starting spot. Mm-hmm. We've had too many rookies in the last 2 or 3 years who have been gifted these positions, and lots of people were very critical of Igor with Mikal Bridges, for instance, this season, but he kind of made him earn the minutes, every minute that he got, and he really, unless there was really bad injury scenarios, he didn't just gift him those starting spots all the time, and he earned the spot, and that's what I'd be doing with any guy that they draft outside of Zion. Zion starts straight away.
I think the thing there, because I was one of those people, was that, yeah, you want the rookie to earn the spot, but it's not like the old guys in front of him were earning their spot. So it's like, yeah, I mean, I think he earned it, but I think he earned it maybe a little earlier than Igor allowed him to sneak in.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, my point there is bring in better players where it actually becomes a thing that he has to do, rather than it, by default, him already becoming better than the other alternatives there.
Yeah, I'm never going to disagree with bring in better players.
That's my GM slogan if I ever got the job. Bring in better players.
That's a pretty good one. I support you. Pick 5 through 7. This one's going to be pretty short. I think cause we're, like you mentioned, like we already mentioned a few times, we're going to look at these guys in depth over the next few weeks.
Yes.
I think, again, trade the pick, sure, if it's a player we want. But at that point, 5 through 7, you're not getting Drew Holiday, you're not getting Bradley Beal, so you're going to trade for Spencer Dinwiddie, maybe. Mm-hmm. I'll just mention a couple guys in my general lean here. Like Darius Garland's going to be a guy I talked about. Brandon Clark I mentioned. Jarrett Culver. This is where Cam Reddish becomes obviously in the discussion, and that's going to be polarizing at the very least.
Yep.
My general lean here. I'm going to prefer low usage players as a tiebreaker than players who are going to have the ball in their hands a lot. Mm-hmm. Think, Mikal Bridges rather than Josh Jackson, which maybe is too obvious. I would say Mikal Bridges rather than even like early Booker. You want guys who are going to be able to learn how to play basketball without destroying your team while they're doing it. So that's going to be my general lean.
I think that's a great point, and particularly putting those two guys up against each other. What we saw the Suns do last draft with their trade for Mikal Bridges, that's the kind of guys that they should be looking for, and I'd probably just jump on the back of that point and say, as Suns people, if we're projecting out what they might do if they're in that range, I'd look for them to take kind of ready-made guys like Mikal.
Yep.
So the names there are probably, Hunter, Clark, Williams,
yep.
All guys that are north of 20 years old and that might come in and be able to play a role, even if it's only in 10, 15 minutes a night, that, they're not going to hurt the team like a Josh Jackson when you're trying to give them reps. They're just going to go out there and do what they do. So, even though I'm higher than most on a guy like Cam Reddish, I think even that would be, you're picking him for potential over production. So you could throw a blanket over probably 10 to 15 names here, as you said, Max. And The only other point I'd make is there's probably guys like Goga, Hayes from my team, Texas, and maybe even a guy like Bol. I just think there's guys, bigs in particular, and then maybe some shooting guards, high usage shooting guards as well, that you can basically just cross out if the Suns are in that range because of what they've already got.
From your team. How many Texas Longhorns basketball games do you watch this season, David?
I do actually try and catch them as much as possible, Max, but I'll be watching more Arizona next year, as I said on Twitter earlier this week.
Let's not get into that. I don't want to talk about that right now. That makes me sad.
Let me throw, I guess we'll end this section with a couple of questions towards you. Who do you think, and we are early in this scenario, we're probably a little bit behind those that follow the draft all year, but as we said earlier with our key dates, we're going to have plenty of time to catch up here. But right now, who do you think you're higher than the general consensus out there that you've seen with a particular prospect?
Good question. I think Brandon Clark. I'm going to be one of those people yelling about him.
Yep.
People are going to be like, oh, he's old, blah, blah, blah. He's somebody who gets better every single year and is already good and will be good right away next day. And I just think it makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
And then I think I'm really going to like Darius Garland because, my man crush is Damian Lillard. I love guards who can shoot.
Yep.
Off the dribble, and he can do that already. There's some other problems with him, but if you could shoot off the dribble, in my mind, you're a lot of the way there already.
Yep.
How about you?
What about lower? Give me your lower one first, because I'm seeing some maybe trends here.
Even though he kind of passes my low usage test, at least early on, Cam Reddish, I'm low on him. I just don't think he has the attitude sort of thing that I want in the scene. I want guys who are going to bring themselves along, not guys who require development, because although Igor showed some stuff there, I still think the Suns organization is not the best player development organization.
Yep.
And then I'm going to be lower, so a guy like Kevin Porter Jr. maybe.
Yep.
Even though I think he's really tantalizing, I cannot see him working on the Suns at all early on.
That is the correct answer, because ask the two questions to me, Max.
Who are you higher on for the Suns in this range, David?
Cam Reddish.
I know you love Cam.
EDM is my nickname for him, which is probably my favorite out of all of the nicknames that I've got so far.
So what does that mean?
All right, so EDM is electronic dance music, obviously, for those music lovers out there, which everything tells me that I should hate that genre, but every now and then there's a song that I absolutely love, and that is Cam Reddish for me.
I love it.
And the perfect layer on top of that is EDM is Enes Del Mar in initial format, which anyone who's seen Brokeback Mountain, there's a famous quote from that film, which I am a big fan of, and that is, "I can't quit you." And that is me to Cam Reddish right now, Max.
Wow. Well, you know what? My brother was saying to me earlier today, we don't disagree enough on this podcast, so I'm glad we have something to disagree on. I will say, I do think that guy I watch him. He definitely is going to be able to shoot. His shot is gorgeous. So, as somebody who loves shooting, we're going to talk about shooting later, that is the one thing about him that's tantalizing.
Yeah, and I'm higher on him as a defender too, so I think that's why I still really love Cam Reddish. But yep, ask me the next question.
Yeah, who are you low on?
Darius Garland.
I like this. We're going to fight a little bit.
We are.
Why are you low on him?
This is going to sound really bad off the back of, a season that Trae Young had, but small, thin guards who struggle to finish around the rim and have health concerns before they're even a pro is no for me, Max.
Yeah, I mean, that's an obviously fair point. I think Darius Garland for me is going to be one of those head versus heart guys.
Yeah.
I'm going to agree in my head with everything you say negatively about him, and it's still going to love him. It's not going to matter.
Yeah.
Same with you and Cam.
Yeah, he's going to be your Enes Del Mar for sure.
Exactly. All right, we'll move on to the playoff stuff in a second here, but first, David, will you take us through Did You Know?
I can, Max. So, unfortunately, some somber news last week with Phoenix head coach John McLeod passing away aged 81. So, did you know McLeod was the longest tenured coach of the Suns and the winningest coach too, with an overall record of 579 and 543, Max. He coached Phoenix from 73 all the way to my birth year 1987, including 9 playoff runs and the Suns' first of only 2 finals appearances in 1976. McLeod was by far the Suns' most successful coach. That his stats are silly when it comes to games coached, wins, playoff appearances, and playoff wins as well. As previously mentioned, his 14 seasons with the Suns, or 1,122 games, are the most by any coach. McLeod accounts for 27.1% of total Suns games coached, Max. That's only 0.5% off Jimmer Fredette's field goal percentage this season, Max, of 27.6%. He also coached 579 wins compared to 1,607 from 18 other coaches of the Suns. Again, roughly a 26 to 27% of the total amount, and more wins than Rashawn Holmes had points this season, Max, who had 572 for those playing along. McLeod also coached 81 playoff games for the Suns, the same number of years he lived. He owns 39 of the Suns' 133 playoff wins, the same number as years Jamal Crawford has currently lived, Max. But Max, I haven't thrown a test your way yet, so now seems the perfect time. John McLeod is one of 15 Suns in the Ring of Honor. I'm going to put you on the spot here. How many of the other 14 in the ring can you name?
Oh, God. Walter Davis.
1.
Paul Westphal.
2.
Let's do the obvious ones. Nash.
3.
Kevin Johnson.
4.
Charles Barkley.
5.
Dan Marley.
6.
Dick Van Arsdale.
7.
Connie Hawkins.
8.
Did Marion get in yet?
No.
That's embarrassing. They need to put him in.
Yep.
Shoot. I'm probably missing some obvious ones, but I'm going to leave it there because that was long enough.
That was long enough, and you did pretty well. Probably better than I would off the top of my head, for sure. So, to end, Max, we're going to call this exercise 6 Degrees of John McLeod to show just how much his fingerprints are all over this franchise. So, there are 4 non-playing members of the Suns' Ring of Honor, plus McLeod. They are, of course, Jerry Colangelo, Cotton Fitzsimmons, Al McCoy, and Joe Prosky. Colangelo, of course, hired McLeod out of college with Oklahoma and then fired McLeod many years later during the drug saga that plagued the Suns team. Fitzsimmons, interestingly, had his 2 main coaching stints either side of McLeod's 14-year tenure, first becoming the head coach in 70-72 and then again in 88-92, Max. Prosky joined the team in its inception, just 5 years before McLeod, as the athletic trainer in the foundational year of 68, as I said, and remained all the way through McLeod's stint with the Suns, while McCoy joined 1 year before in 72 and remains until this day, although the newest member of the Suns' Ring of Honor might be ready to call it a day, it seems. And Max, that leaves 10 players in the Ring of Honor. Alvin Adams played college ball for McLeod at Oklahoma before being drafted by the Suns. Connie Hawkins played 8 games for McLeod in 73 before being traded to the Lakers for Keith Erickson and a second-round pick. Adams, Walter Davis, Dick Van Arsdale, and Paul Westphal all went on to play under Coach McLeod through the late 70s glory days, while Van Arsdale also finished the 14th season McLeod started as coach in 87. Even Kevin Johnson has a direct link. McLeod came back in 99 as an assistant coach, where Kevin Johnson led the team with Scott Skiles as coach after Danny Ainge was sacked, and they went to the second round. Side note here, Max, and you touched on it briefly before, Sean Marion was a rookie that year, and he should be the 16th member of the Ring of Honor, as you said. Then there's Steve Nash. McLeod was the 13th Ring of Honor member inducted, which just happens to be the number Steve Nash wore, who was the 14th member of the Ring of Honor. And of course, 14 is the amount of seasons McLeod coached. So Max, for those following along, that leaves Chambers, Barkley, and Marley as the only Ring of Honor members without a direct link to John McLeod that I at least know of, just 20% of the total ring. But I'll leave you with this. Chambers wore 24, Barkley wore 34, and Marley wore 9. Together, those add up to 67. 1967 was the last year that the Phoenix Suns didn't exist in the NBA, Max. They had 5 coaching changes in their first 5 years before hiring McLeod, and he has had a major say in the Suns' legacy ever since. So that's it for this week, Max. Hopefully you and the listeners enjoyed that little look back over McLeod's Suns' career. And fitting that we now go into some playoff observations given how successful he was as a coach.
2 quick reactions. The first one is I cannot believe he coached that long. That is a very long time that he is. That tenure from the 70s to the 80s, that's a long one.
Yep.
The other one is that I went to Al McCoy's Ring of Honor induction game, so I can't believe I didn't get him. That's pretty bad.
I'll let you off the hook for putting you on the spot there.
Yeah, that's bad. All right, yeah, so we're going to move into playoffs. Like we said earlier, we're going to try to have some Suns tie-ins here.
Yep.
And these are kind of just random playoff observations. So first one, this is the one that came from a listener, the only one we didn't come up with ourselves. It's from Mo at BabaYetu_ on Twitter. Great question he asks. Similar to what you've discussed before, David, what playoff outcomes would benefit the Phoenix Suns the most? Since you've been on this, do you want to lead off?
I can. I mean, I won't go over old ground too much, but I'm definitely looking at teams like Indiana and Utah that are struggling to score in the playoffs, Max. And then probably not a direct link here, but I wanted to mention, something like, I don't think Toronto are going to lose to Orlando in the first round, for instance, but we might get into the East a little bit later. If Toronto struggle, maybe get knocked out in the second round and decide to, and Kawhi looks like he's going to leave, as we touched on earlier, that might mean that they trade a guy like Kyle Lowry. Whether that has a link to the Suns or not, I don't know. But I think that kind of starts a chain reaction throughout the whole league. And, more player movement and, more teams wanting to get high draft picks, for instance, is going to benefit the Phoenix Suns. So, yeah, I'm kind of looking at teams that are struggling to score for, I guess trades for, say, a guy like TJ Warren, and then just chaos to kind of create an offseason that the Suns might be able to benefit from.
Yeah, my point here is that I think chaos is generally the right answer, but I think there are times when it's not what you want. You want the organized chaos in a way that benefits the Suns. So, yeah. For example, you wouldn't want Portland to go to the finals and win, I don't think, because we both think Aminu would be a really nice target for the Suns.
Yep.
In certain scenarios, and if Portland goes to the finals, they're more likely to bring their entire team back. So what you're really looking at is you're looking for you want the rosters of the teams with the players you don't want to go far. You want the rosters of the players you want to fail early.
Yeah, that's definitely, if we've got our Suns hat on, that's the way you should be looking at the playoffs for sure.
Yeah, I think one that's I'll only highlight one because we're going to spend a ton of time on this. But I think the East is going to be really interesting on this because Boston versus Milwaukee, I think you want more of the guys in Milwaukee's roster, but chaos theory, I think you want Kyrie to leave Boston. So I think it's a tough one. So there's some that come down to it, and you're like, it's tough to figure out what you'd want as a Suns fan.
Yeah, every round that Boston goes on and his teammates step up to the plate is going to make it harder and harder for Kyrie Irving to leave. So
yeah, and harder for them to move on from Rozier, which I don't think we want them to move on from Rozier. We want them to stay with him forever.
Exactly.
So yeah, all right, I think we can go ahead and move on. The only last one I'll make the point on because I also thought about Lowry. I think Toronto versus Philadelphia is another one that'd be tough to assess because people have Tobias Harris dreams, But I think Kyle Lowry dreams are more realistic, so I think I'd root for Philadelphia there.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I'll probably throw into my first observation here, Max, which is more of a statement than a question, although I am going to throw something in your way at the end. But just the kind of polarizing nature of the 2 8 seeds here. I think Detroit are likely out in a sweep. Blake not being able to play those first couple of games is really disappointing after, being the reason that they got there. And then, the Clippers are, after losing today, are probably likely to go out in kind of the best 4-1 defeat that we've seen in the playoffs in some time. And it kind of, those two stories are so different. This is projecting forward a little bit, maybe next season, maybe the season after. But, it just goes to show the Suns building the right way and sneaking into the playoffs. I think, if you could do it like the Clippers with, some good players playing above themselves, some rookies playing, rotation minutes, or young guys at least, Shamet, SGA. I think I even saw Jerome Robinson out there for some pretty extended minutes today. So, that's kind of the right way. Whereas if you trade for a guy like Blake Griffin, just sneak into the 8th slot and then get wiped by the top seed and then don't really have any kind of future with that core that got you there, that's kind of the wrong way to get to the playoffs. And I just, as a Suns fan, seeing those two polarizing things was it was kind of a stark contrast for me, Max.
Yeah, that's a really nice point. Not all 8 seeds are created equal. Not all 8 seeds that get blown out even are created equal.
Yeah.
The Clippers have an incredibly promising future. Detroit maybe has one of the worst futures in the league, so that's a really interesting point. I like that one.
So I'll throw the question at you. I have thrown it at you before, but I'm not sure you gave me a full answer to it, and I do want the listeners to consider the question as well. But guaranteeing health next year, if I could do that, how much would you pay the playoff version of Patrick Beverley that we've seen?
So I can't assume he's going to be as good as his best game, but just generally he's playing this way sort of thing.
Yeah, we get 70 starting games at that intensity next year for the Suns.
Oof, man, that's worth so much. I'm going to sound nuts here. $13-14 million a year.
I don't think it's nuts at all, because the point for me is, like, outside of some of those max free agents, if it was a guy that you could guarantee this production and complete health out of, which obviously you can never do, but I don't think there's any better signing for the Phoenix Suns in the offseason, just from all the things that he brings and intangible things that we've harped on quite a lot that the Suns really need with this young core.
100%. You're not paying for his production statistically. You're paying for the fact that every other player in your roster is going to be better on a night-to-night basis.
Exactly.
It's kind of hard to value that, other than say a lot. All right, let's move on to the next point. Then this is another one that's just kind of like an obvious point, sort of, but I think that the playoffs just making it glaring. You have to be able to shoot in the NBA these days, David. The bottom 7 playoff teams in three-point percentage so far: Orlando, Indiana, Brooklyn, Detroit, Philadelphia, OKC, and Utah with 25.5% from three. I think that's a little telling, right? Those teams are all kind of struggling a little bit. Some of them are already eliminated.
Yep, a game I was watching earlier today, even though they eventually lost, even seeing a guy like Landry Shamet be able to hit a couple of threes in a short space of time while Kevin Durant was going up the other end and basically hitting everything that he was throwing up there, that's how you get blown out very quickly. If you can't make shots in the playoffs, you end up with an insurmountable lead. I guess 31 points wasn't enough for the Clippers the other night, but I just think you need guys that can make shots. Watching the game down the stretch, the Utah Houston game, Utah just couldn't make shots, and that kind of allowed Houston to get back in the game when, a game that they really shouldn't have been anywhere near to start with.
A 3 for 20 Harden game.
Yeah, exactly. So even though he tried to deny that he had no idea that, he was 0 for 15 to start the game. Which
bullshit. Maybe you didn't know exactly that was 15, but you didn't make a shot yet, James.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think a great point by you and a great tie into the Suns again. That's what we have to prioritize when it comes to drafting guys, which I think we saw the last regime maybe think about with a guy like Mikal Bridges. Low usage, should be a good shooter in the NBA. And then any free agent acquisition, I just think can basically put a lot, unless it's like a end of the bench minimum big to be your kind of third big or something. I just think just draw a line through any guy that can't shoot, because the Suns are already depleted of that skill on the roster, and everyone...
Well, David, I'm going to call you on this a little bit, because I know that you're a big fan of the Suns getting Ricky Rubio, and I had that thought in my head when I was watching that game. I was like, man, do we really want this guy?
Yep, and that, again, A guy like Derek Favors ties into this point as well.
I have him written down too.
Yeah, I think it ties into this point where, Utah are a great regular season team, Max. This gets magnified in the playoffs, and I think a mistake we've made, I've definitely made in the past, and the fan base has made, and the front office has even made in the past too, is thinking in absolutes and going for that best case scenario all the time, and therefore ending up with nothing. Mm-hmm. I've definitely cooled on a guy like Ricky Rubio, because I think this season compared to last, I don't know the stats off the top of my head, but I think he was a more confident shooter at least last season, and it kind of helped the balance with a guy like Donovan Mitchell, who I guess is quite similar in some ways to Devin Booker, but
I don't like that.
I mean from a high usage shooting guard standpoint. But, I've definitely cooled on Rubio, but at the right price. I wouldn't kind of turn my nose up at him because of some of the other things that he does. And the Suns need to build what might be a playoff team before they think about, what might lose a first-round matchup or something like that.
Yeah, my point is not so much that they shouldn't sign Ricky Rubio. It's more that I think when we're comparing pro and cons on guys, maybe instead of having shooting be, one con as compared to the rest of the pros and cons, maybe we should put that like a con times 5. Like that should be the biggest thing that we're looking at first. And then does the rest of everything else justify that one gaping hole that's more important than anything else sort of thing?
Yeah, I always talk about those boxes with Devin Booker, kind of secondary playmaking, shooting, off the ball shooting and defense. And, I've probably always put shooting in the third tier of those three things. But I think the leap that we saw from Devin as a playmaker, and then I guess always needing to prioritize defense maybe first, unless the offense is amazing, which it wouldn't be in the case of Ricky Rubio. I think maybe shooting needs to come up a rung there, and the playmaking part of it can be a little less featured, which I guess is something that I learnt this season, and I guess the want of a guy like Ricky Rubio who can come in and is already familiar with Igor, maybe doesn't need to be as prioritized as I was doing earlier in the season, Max.
Yeah, I agree. I think what this is like, I think when we evaluate free agents, I think the first question every single time in my brain is going to be, can he shoot?
Yeah.
That's just going to be the first question. David, next one, you want to make a point about bigs in the playoffs?
Yeah, very similar to your shooting point. I think I'll throw the question right out. Off the top of your head, and I've done this to you a lot this episode, so apologies in advance, but who are the best 3 bigs in the playoffs so far?
So far, I would say Al Horford, Clint Capella, and this is going to sound crazy, but Brook Lopez by impact metrics has been ridiculous.
Yep, he has. He definitely popped up when I was kind of looking at this question myself. So, that's interesting from a standpoint of who those players are and the role that they play in offense versus their kind of, I guess, star guys that they're built around. And then I guess the guys that we're not mentioning, you've got Embiid, who had a big game last game, but his health and I guess overall fit with that team is a little bit questionable. It kind of seems like it has to be, he's either going and the rest of the team isn't, or vice versa. We've seen Rudy Gobert get totally schemed out and be a non-factor on offense, which is a worry. Drummond was a non-factor, even though I'm not sure it's entirely his fault, but it's still a concern for that team. Boogie obviously got hurt in his first matchup. Jokic has gotten better as it's gone on, but his percentages versus regular season are down, and his overall aggression is a little bit of a worry with that Denver team, who kind of needs him to be the alpha dog on that team. Steven Adams is the real underwhelming one for me. He's kind of, I guess, indicative of his whole season, just been in the background a little bit. Vucevic is shooting 38% in the playoffs, Max. I think there's a game going on at the moment. Maybe he's proven me wrong in that one, but he's been pretty much a disaster in that series for the Magic so far. And Turner and Sabonis are just a kind of big fat no in that series against the Celtics. They kind of killed them in that series, getting swept. So I guess tying in Ayton, I suppose, to this discussion, I think it says a lot about what he needs to improve on when the Suns are a playoff team, hopefully, because the bigs in these playoffs, at least that we've seen so far, have not been the traditional guys that you would think that were kind of putting teams on their back. They've been more those kind of complementary pieces that are coming to the fore around those stars.
Yeah, bigs are more and more becoming more of a, as you said, complementary, a facilitator kind of piece on an offense and on a team. Defensively, obviously, they're still very important. The ability to... And they're important in a certain way, right? Because as we said, Gobert's getting schemed out of things kind of on both sides of the floor a lot of the time.
And
he still is a good protector. Someone's driving straight at him.
Yeah.
But man, Houston's like this is the worst matchup for him because they really exploit the fact that dude just can't get out and guard guys on the perimeter at all, really.
Exactly, and I was really critical of Igor not playing that Utah-type defense to help DeAndre out as a defender and just make things more simple for him. But we're seeing it in these playoffs. Like, what would that have done for DeAndre Ayton's progression, going forward 2 or 3 years max? If that just means that then the playoffs come and he has no fucking idea how to guard out on the perimeter, then, you haven't done him a favor at all. So again, Igor's taken a hit there to, probably his own coaching prowess as well by just putting DeAndre out there, and we kind of saw some good results. It wasn't all great, it was very mixed, but that's one reason why Ayton might be able to fare better in the playoffs than some of these guys, because he is going to be able to get out there and be more of a factor on offense than a guy like Rudy Gobert as well, Max.
I've long said that DeAndre Ayton's the most important skill to me, and the thing I liked about him most as a prospect is his lateral movement ability on defense.
Yeah.
The fact that he really can just be more of a big wing defender than he is a traditional big defender. I think that's key with him, and I think it's key to get somebody next to him who's going to be like a weak side shot blocker guy, which is why I love the Zion fit. People think Zion and Ayton don't work. I don't get it. But let's move on, David. Let's move into... I have a couple random Eastern Conference, Western Conference playoffs things for you.
Let's do it.
We'll start with the Eastern Conference. I think the most fascinating question all season on this has been and remains what's going to happen with the 4 giants, Milwaukee, Toronto, Philadelphia, and Boston. Mm-hmm. We've talked about this before, but now we've seen them in the playoffs. Things have changed a little bit. I want you to rank them. Start with 4 out of the one that you trust the most to make it out of the conference. Start from least trustworthy to most trustworthy for you.
Okay, there's probably 2 that have flipped here in my ranking, so I think I was a little wrong on Toronto, who I would put at number 4 out of this little group. I'm guessing that the group here is Milwaukee, Boston.
Yeah. Sorry if I didn't make that clear, but yes, that is the group.
They were the top 4 finishers in the conference, so that is very clear to me at least, and I'm sure it was clear to everyone listening along as well. So Toronto looks shaky. I think we've seen playoff Lowry. Kawhi even had a pretty bad game. I think I've always been too high on Kawhi just flicking the switch come playoff time. I think probably something to learn there. That other than a guy like Andre Iguodala, I think regular season form generally depicts what's going to happen in the playoffs for most of these guys from a kind of output standpoint. So I'm a little worried about him, and obviously Pascal Siakam has probably been their best player, which as great of a story that is, I don't think you can be overly confident going into a conference finals or a finals with him being the best player on your team when you've got guys like Kyle Lowry and Kawhi there as well. So I'd rank them 4, Max. I'd put Philly 3. Looks like things are coming together for them, but Embiid's health is a concern. Brooklyn kind of taking them all the way in most of these games is a bit of a concern, and even though I've loved the way that Ben Simmons has played, it just kind of seems to be a different guy each game all the time, which is great from a, I guess, variability standpoint. But, when you want to just be counting on what you can believe in going forward, I'm a little bit worried about Philadelphia. Boston, I was wrong. I think I was wrong on Boston, Max. I think I was too tough on them. It's a shame that in both conferences we're probably going to get Milwaukee, Boston, and Golden State, Houston in the second round instead of the 2 finals matchups there, Max. But I think I saw you earlier today note that Boston could be a little bit of a scary proposition for the Bucks, but I've still got the Bucks number 1. I think they've been very limited question marks to what they've done so far, even though Detroit was the opponent. So that's how I'd rank them, Max. I'm not sure if you would be any different.
Pretty close. My only difference is I have Philadelphia 4, Toronto 3.
Okay.
I think the real story of this so far is that Boston's sort of flexing. They have Kyrie Irving. I think we all kind of overlooked that a little bit. Kyrie Irving is in the Eastern Conference by far the best, end of game closer on any of these teams. It's not even close. So in close games, you have to give every single lean to Boston every single time. Giannis is obviously Giannis. He's going to be the best player. But, with 3 minutes left, if you shade him out, you make sure you have multiple of those Boston wings, not letting him really penetrate.
Yeah,
it's going to be tough at times. I just don't think anybody can ever stop Kyrie, ever. So they're going to get better shots. It's going to be really interesting to see. But generally, I agree with you. I still have Milwaukee 1. I think they're going to win the conference, but Boston's right there.
The start of that series, which I guess is what you were alluding to earlier today on Twitter, is going to be so crucial. You could
I think Boston's going to win Game 1, David.
Yeah, and that's going to, potentially start the chain reaction of things maybe falling apart a little bit and guys trying to do too much rather than, relying on, this is from a Milwaukee standpoint, relying on what they've done all season. So that's going to be fascinating to watch, and I guess we're just getting the better matchups a little earlier in the playoffs. Which...
It reminds me of those Suns-Spurs series so much.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. I just think the Boston obviously playing the Spurs and Milwaukee playing the Suns. Just the overwhelming talent, but they're just going to get beat because of just the little things. The better coach slightly. Bud's good, but I think Stevens is still a little better.
Yeah.
You just have the better defenders. You have that one guy like Tony Parker, Kyrie. You just can't stop. It's going to be a fun series.
It really is. Yeah, and I'm looking forward to, I guess, the trade-off being those both matchups in both conferences probably being just one series earlier than we would have wanted.
So here's my question for you in the West. This is going to be shorter. I think the fact that Golden State and Houston are playing each other in the second round, it's just fascinating, obviously.
Yeah.
It throws everything around. So I want to ask you this. Who are you most confident in the entire conference about they're going to make the Western Conference Finals? Which team are you picking? I'll ask you that first, then I'm going to ask you a subsequent question.
If it's a Golden State versus the field type question, I'd probably still go in Golden State. Obviously, the openness of the other side of the bracket, so to speak, is the interesting thing. But you look at the teams in that little pool of teams, and none of them spark me with too much confidence, Max, which is why I then go back the other way. And I've still got Golden State in a series. I think, to throw a question back to you, I'm not sure how much this changes it, but if Houston had home court in that series, would you lean... I mean, I'm not even sure whether you're leaning Golden State or Houston in that series. That's probably the first question. But if the answer is the Warriors, how close is it that you might go the other way if home court was different?
Ooh, that's a great question. Man, in this modern era with how much these teams shoot and how well these teams know each other, I don't know how much it matters, at least relative to other series.
Yeah.
I think it matters less than usual. I have Golden State, about a 60% chance, I'd say, to beat Houston, which I think probably is a little closer than most people would have it. I've been just so impressed by Houston this year. But I still lean Golden State. I think the interesting part about it, though, is because they're playing each other, the question being, who's most likely to make it to the Western Conference Finals. I think had Denver really come out and dominated San Antonio and show that they kind of are the obvious 2 seed, I think they would probably be the best answer for that, right? Because they don't have to play against Golden State or Houston. But because, like you said, it's just such a morass over there, I don't know. Who would you even favor out of those 4 teams, David? I think I might favor Portland slightly, but it's tough.
Yeah, I probably lean Portland, Max, just from where that series currently sits, and I guess the way that they've gone about it in their first few games. I think, as I said, it's wide open. None of them really put a hell of a lot of confidence into me. San Antonio is an interesting one. I think one thing that I probably got right early on in our predictions before the season started was don't bet against San Antonio, and that proves right once again. Mm-hmm. That's an interesting thing. If they can get over Denver somehow, and Portland OKC goes to a slogfest 7-game series, it would be an absolute disaster if San Antonio made the conference finals, because I just think that spectacle would be terrible against the Warriors or even Houston. But
they would get so annihilated, man. That'd be a 4-game.
But I could see them getting over their options before that. But yeah, I'm probably leaning Portland. But OKC are probably, I guess, the best chance of a good matchup against Golden State.
Yep.
Potentially in the conference final. So I kind of lean towards them just from a spectacle standpoint. But if I had to bet right now, with my own money, you'd probably have to lean Portland. Do you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I have Portland. Yeah. Although worth noting to everybody listening, we're recording this before Game 4 of that series.
Yeah, exactly.
30 minutes. So if OKC comes out and just destroys Portland tonight, then maybe things will change a little bit. But David, you have one last thing to get to before 7 seconds or less.
I just love watching players in the playoffs, Max, and particularly when my team's not in it, I'm rooting for players more than teams sometimes, because I've always got individual biases against teams that I don't like most of the time. So I guess my questions here would be not so much guys that you already follow. You know, for me, it would be guys like Patrick Beverley and maybe Simmons, but who's your favourite surprise player to watch so far?
Ooh, surprise player is tough. I thought you were going to go regular players, given this Lillard easily. Surprise player. I'm going to go with Pascal Siakam.
Yep.
I knew he was really good, obviously, but I didn't realize just how good he is. He's been, like you said earlier, I think you said he's been like their best player this series, really, so far.
Yeah.
I think Kawhi, while we've been recording, apparently has been having an insane game tonight, so maybe he's starting to take that mantle back. But Pascal Siakam's been a revelation this season. I want to get into his, at some point, not now because we're running out of time, but his upside, I think, is an interesting question. I want to know what he can be.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with a guy like him. Every hurdle in front of him, he just seems to leap and go up another level whenever there's a new challenge, and this playoffs has kind of certainly shown that. I think, an interesting thing for me going back to the draft is why a guy like Sekou and Dimboya, I think he's going to get compared a lot to a guy like Pascal Siakam. As an international prospect, and I think size-wise and skill-wise, he certainly matches up with him. So, yeah, I love Pascal. He brings the energy, and he's definitely a good one to watch, but probably not a surprise for me because I've been, loving him all year. Derek White, again, a pretty obvious one, but he's the surprise for me. I'd throw him out there. I think he's shooting 64% or something so far these playoff series. But who's your biggest disappointment to watch? Whether it's a guy that you love that has disappointed you, or another surprise one, Max?
That's a good question. So actually, I have a lot of Schadenfreude on this, so it doesn't disappoint me at all. It actually pleases me.
Yep.
But I am, even I, as a Donovan Mitchell sort of skeptic, have been surprised at just how bad he's been.
Yeah.
He has been terrible, David. Like, just really bad in every facet of the game. He turns the ball over too much. He takes really bad shots. It's not just that he's missing good shots. He's just taking really bad shots.
Yeah.
Listen, he's a second-year player. I'm not saying this is, where he's doomed to be forever. But the fact that he's never been an efficient scorer for any long stretch, and he looks like this for the second straight playoffs, because people thought he was good in the last playoffs. Guess what? He actually really wasn't that good.
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I'd be a little bit worried about him if I were a Utah fan.
Yeah, it's kind of alternate points here for me on him, and both tying into Booker. I'm definitely taking note of this performance for when Booker finally makes the playoffs and has one bad game, and what might be all over the Twitter timeline after that with some overreactions, because Mitchell seems to get a pretty easy ride with some of these things, whether it's to do with his age or some false reasonings with the team built around him and stuff, which I just think is ridiculous. But the other thing for me is I like to give him a little bit of leeway, particularly because of his age, and particularly because of things that we've argued from Devin Booker's standpoint in terms of I do think that the team around him from an offensive standpoint is not exactly built the best for him, even though I think he gets too much leeway sometimes. But I don't want to fall too far into trashing him too much because of how much I defend Devin Booker in the same scenario. So, yeah, that's an interesting one. I'd go the same team and kind of countryman for me, Joe Ingles, shooting 23.5% from three, Max, which is just not going to cut it when that's the one thing that you really bring to this team. And, I guess my personal biases aside, as I mentioned before, against a team like Utah, I do love Ingles, and it's hard to see him, I guess, go through this slump at the most important part of the season.
Yeah, it is tough. All right, David, ready for 7 seconds or less?
Yep, your time to throw some questions my way, Max.
Yep, gonna skip the rules. Everyone knows the rules by now. These are pretty easy ones, David. I'm just gonna ask you either ors on players for the Suns free agency. Somewhat to illustrate what we've been talking about all episode long. So not gonna be rocket science here, but I want to illustrate some points here. So number one, would you rather have Nikola Mirotic or Derek Favors in free agency?
This one's really tough. If we're not talking about money and stuff, I'd go Mirotic. But I do think, I'm not going to get into it in depth here, but there is a case for Derek Favors on this team next year, Max.
There's a case. I agree. For me, shooting. What's the first question? Shooting. Nikola Mirotic then.
Yep.
That's what I do.
Yep.
Kyle Lowry or Mike Conley?
Ooh. Again, putting everything like cost and things out the window. Can we go and look at who's shot better this season, Max, to answer that first question? I'd probably my gut says Kyle Lowry.
I think Kyle Lowry's contract situation is better. It's
Yep.
a 1 year for sure, so I think that's probably why. But I think Mike Conley's probably a slightly better player, slightly worse contract.
Yep.
This one, I know your answer on this, and I have the opposite answer, so I'm really asking you this as a preview of a debate I think we're probably going to end up having some point. Drew Holiday or Bradley Beal?
Drew Holiday.
Yep, Bradley Beal for me, and that's a preview because we are going to probably hash that one out at some point this offseason.
It sounds like we should have just an off-season fight episode where we talk about
Yes.
Cam Reddish, Darius Garland, and Drew Holiday / Bradley Beal max.
Yeah, once we settle these things out and we know where we are in these things, we should just have that episode at some point. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I like it.
All right, that's it for us. Please, everyone, rate, review, and subscribe. We really appreciate it. David, any new reviews?
We have not had any new reviews for a while, which I would put on more us than the listeners with our sporadic episodes. But as you alluded to and we spoke about quite a bit during this episode, we do have plans for pretty consistent coverage for the next little while leading up to the draft. So we'll do our bit and hopefully the listeners can do theirs and throw a few more reviews our way, Max.
Yep, we will start doing our part. We just ask that you do yours. That's really all we ask on this podcast. All right, that's it for us. Thanks, David.
Thank you.